top left-hand corner. There we go.
Happy New Year to you all from Table Tennis Scotland. My special guest tonight didn't take up the sport until he was 17. Well, that didn't stop him from playing for Warwickshire and winning the county championship twice in a row. Remarkably, both when he was well into his 30s. He went on to hold the highest coaching qualification award in England, the coveted 3-star. Like most of his generation, he cut his table tennis teeth in the highly acclaimed Central YMCA in Birmingham, which later included a young Desmond Douglas. However, it's his fascination
We may have lost you, Dave.
Yeah,
I might step in as Dave's signal may have gone. Am I right, guys? We can't, obviously, Dave lost. Was that right, Kieran? Have you lost Dave as well?
Looks like. Yeah, I've lost Dave.
Yeah. So I'll finish Dave's introduction as we try and get him logged in again. So in case you don't know, I am Mark Lundberg. I'm here most weeks. Dave hadn't got quite his introduction to me yet. As you might hear Dave in the background now. But our special guest tonight, Dave almost finished her introduction, is Barry Hayward. Barry, if you can start us off with how did we get into table tennis books?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. The last time I was on one of these Zoom meetings was just before Christmas, and I was on a speed awareness course then, and I'm hoping that tonight will be a bit more enjoyable than that. But good evening and welcome to everybody. Happy New Year. Yeah, I started collecting table tennis books in 1978, and that was the year after the World Championships were held in Birmingham. And I saw Ron Creighton displaying his collection of books at that event. And I was in the process. I just started to help to write a book. And I felt that I needed a few sort of books that were already in circulation just to have a look at and get an idea of exactly what I was supposed to be writing about. So I thought I'll just pop down the local bookshop and get half a dozen second-hand books. And I got my half a dozen second-hand books, and that second-hand half a dozen has now turned into 360. So, yeah, it's just been a progression, really. I started collecting about 42 years ago. So I've been doing it pretty well on and off for 42 years now.
Brilliant. Dave, have we got you back?
Yeah, where did you lose me?
Well, just as you were finishing your introduction, I stepped in. I think of months of working with you, I knew exactly where to step in.
Brilliant.
So yeah, so back over to you now, Dave. So,
oh, good. Right. Did we have time to wish our selector, our national selector, Ryan,
no, happy got that far.
No. Oh, okay, right. That tells us a little bit about how Barry got involved in his collection. I think we'll take Kieran Walker's very interesting question first.
Okay.
Of all your table tennis books, which is the rarest?
Well, I think I might surprise people with this one, because I think most people would think the rarer ones are about 1902. And generally speaking, they'd be right. But most of those older books are in the ITTF Museum, and there are collectors about who've got them. But I think I've got one that I haven't heard that anyone else has got. And strangely enough, it's only published in 1954, I think it is. Let me just check. Yeah, 1954. And it's, can I put this in front of the screen? Can you see that?
Good idea. Yep. How to Become a Champion.
Can you see that? Yeah, it's called Table Tennis by Miklos Zabados. Zabados was world champion in 1931, but he emigrated to Australia in about 1936-37. And he did a little bit of coaching over there, but he published this book in Australia, which is why I suspect it's not very common over here. And it's the only one. I don't know of anybody else that's got one. I'd heard rumours that there was a book by him, and I wrote to the Australian Association their secretary sent me a very nice letter back. This is about 15, 20 years ago. He sent me a very nice letter back. He said, no, he said he did emigrate here, but he's never written a book. About 2 years later, I had another letter back from the same guy who was secretary of the Australian Association saying, you know that book that you were on about? I found one. Do you want it? And I said, yes, please. And he sent it to me. And it's a very rare book. It's not all that good for tactics and everything. In fact, if I can just show you, if I can find it quickly. Yeah, that's the sort of pictures that you get. So you can take it from that, what sort of standard we're talking about. But he was world champion. And I'm just flicking through it just before this evening, and I came across the last little bit. I'll just read you three lines from the last little bit. He's talking about formulating doubles partnerships, and he says, it is a great advantage if the two players have a real understanding. Two close friends, boyfriend and girlfriend, or husband and wife can make a very good combination. I don't think he's ever met my wife.
Okay, right. Before I get Barry into his top 12, Mark, do you want to fire a question from you or Charlie Ellis?
Yeah, so Charlie Ellis has provided some fantastic questions tonight. I think we'll get on to them. I mean, so maybe a question for myself to start with was that I think when you do some research, Barry, of table tennis books, I would say, I mean, from your expert knowledge, are all of them all about tactics, or is there any autobiographical or biography table tennis books out there?
Well, I think you'll find that most of the ones that I'm talking about tonight will not be how to play. Most of them are biographical.
Brilliant.
And I've got one or two others as well. But I think generally, I mean, I've always advocated, I shall say this later on, I've always advocated that the best books on how to play are usually the very recent ones, because the game has changed tremendously. I stopped playing competitively in 1984, and the game is unrecognisable now to what it was in 84. And, you know, I think you have to be up to date, and you can get lots of things from the Bergman book or wherever that are very, very useful at that time, but I don't think they apply very often now. You might pick up the odd snippet on tactics or something like that, and that's about all. I think some of the later coaching books in the last 10 years or so have been really, really good. But no, I don't think the older ones are much help, to be honest.
I mean, that's actually a question that actually Charlie asks in one of his questions. And just to cover it off now, he makes a point about Chester Barnes' book, More Than a Match, where it looks about old instructions, techniques. But he sort of answered that you would probably say the more modern books are they're the ones looking at, and you're only really going to pick up a snippet from one of the older books, really.
Well, I think if you pick up the Chester, from memory, I think the Chester Barnes book, I think we're talking about More Than a Match, because Chester did do about half a dozen books, but the one that's More Than a Match, there's only about 10 pages out of 150 where he talks about how to play. And you might pick up one or two useful things, but if you pick up one or two by other people that I shall mention later on, I think every page you'll pick up things, you know, because it's modern, it's up to date, and it'll teach you skills that perhaps you hadn't got. Whereas there aren't much in the older ones. I mean, the Bergman book, which everybody thinks is fantastic, he's got about 100 pages on how to play. There's 240 pages in the book, 100 of them on how to play. And frankly, how to play might have been very good in 1950, but there's no sponge about then.
Yeah.
And it's a different game completely.
Okay, I'm just going to let Kieran ask another question, and then we're going to get Barry's list. Kieran?
Me and my dad was we watched the film by Marty Reisman, and once we finished, my dad wanted to he checked if there was a book, and then there was a book, and he wanted to see if he could get it, and there was only one available, and it was about £800, and we was wondering how much did you get your copy for?
somebody's looking for a sucker to pay £800, you can get the Reisman book. Try looking, if you haven't looked on eBay, try eBay. If you haven't looked there, try AB Books, ABE Books, and see, I'm pretty sure you'd get one there. I think you'd get one for well under 50 quid. I think I paid for mine, from memory, about £10, but that was 20 years ago. Just to educate me, Kieran, why would that be good? Because it's not something I'm familiar with. So why was your dad really wanting that book?
Well, shall I stop? Hold on. Shall I stop? Because that just might be in your...
Oh, is it? So
Is it
I'll wait.
Yeah.
I'll wait to find out. I'll sit down for a second.
Yeah, good foresight. Okay, Barry, we're interested in your top 12, and are you going to go from 1 to 6, 7 to 12, 12 to what? Where are you going to start us off?
I'm going to start with number 6 and work my way down to number 1.
Wow. So coming in at number 6.
Just before I bore the pants off everybody with this, you okay? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Is everybody frozen up again?
No, you're
okay.
All good.
We're all good. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to start with number 6 and work my way down to number 1, first of all. And just before I start, number 6, you might find I'm going on. You think, gosh, we're going to be here till midnight. But this is the longest of all of the books to talk about, because in my view, it is of enormous importance to our game, or it was of enormous importance. And here's the book. You can see it there.
Can you a bit higher, Barry? That's it. Yeah.
Okay. The Game of Ping Pong and How to Play It by Arnold Parker. I've got him confused with the golfer. And it was written in 1902.
Wow.
And it was published in London by T. Fisher Unwin. And Arnold Parker became known as Ping Pong Parker because he won the Queen's Hall tournament in 1902. He was a 23-year-old London bank clerk, and he became the unofficial World Ping Pong Championship. There weren't any official World Ping Pong Championship, so this was an unofficial one. And they were unofficial because the game was still played in different ways in different parts of the country. Some parts of the country, they were playing 60 points, for example, in Wales. It was 60 points, and that whoever won the 60 points, that was the match over. Other places were playing best of 3 up to 21. Some of them were playing up to 15. All sorts of rules, all sorts of net heights, and also there were different sized tables as well. So you can see it was in a sort of, it's still developing. It was all over the place. But this one was the first tournament that pulled everything together and got everyone playing in a similar way at this tournament. It was reported in all the national newspapers. So this guy, Arnold Ping Pong Parker, got overnight fame. And one of the results was this book that he produced. Table tennis was invented in 1885. And we can give that a specific date because there was a guy called James Devonshire who patented it. It's the first registered table tennis game that was ever done, and it was called parlour lawn tennis, and it was patented in 1885. Now that meant that people, if they wanted to produce their own set, they couldn't just do it. They had to raise their own patent. So you got all games all springing up with different names. There was ping pong, pom pom, whiff waff, whim wham, Ping-a-pong, parlour, lawn tennis, parlours. There are all these different names. So it really was a bit of a mix-up, really. The balls were usually made out of cork, but the bats were something like this one. Can you see that one there that I've got? That's one of the original vellum bats there. This is about 1903, something like that. And the ball was usually rubber or cork. It wasn't a celluloid ball. So if you listen now, that's the ball bouncing. So that's the ping, that's the pong, and that's where that name came from. Everything changed in 1900 because in 1900 they invented celluloid, and celluloid immediately within a year or so they brought this into the world of celluloid ping pong balls. That changed everything because for once you got a ball that bounced consistently. They weren't perfect. I mean, you still had balls with egg shapes, still had balls that cracked, you had ones that weren't round and all the rest of it, but at least you got a darn sight more consistency than they'd ever had before. And that was the springboard for table tennis as we've come to know it today. So much so that in 1902, there were about 20 different books published, all shapes and sizes, but this one by Parker was probably the best of them all. In 1902 also, the game had started to spread to the States, and this book was republished by Fenno's in New York. Now, in the States, they hadn't got the same sort of copyright that we got here, which meant that over there, they just saw this book that I've just shown you, and they said, right, we're going to produce one of those, and they produced this one. Exactly the same book, exactly the same author. The difference is just cover. That's the only difference between it. And that one was published by a firm called Fenno of New York. That one, exactly the same book, exactly the same title, everything's the same. It's softback, but it's exactly the same. And that was published in New York as well by a firm called J.S. Ogilvy. This one, same book again, published in the States, in New York, Ping Pong, the Game and How to Play It by Arnold Parker, exactly the same again. This one was published by Parker. So altogether, there were 16 different books in the same year. And I tell you what, even Harry Potter didn't get that sort of appeal. It was a ping pong fever at the time. Everybody was fanatical about it. It was played after parties. You could go into any sort of public room, really, where there wasn't a ping pong table there. Everyone was fanatic about it. Both sides of the Atlantic. Table tennis was on its way. That's why that book's so important, and that's why I've placed it at number 6. As you would expect, very little of that book is of much practical use today. It's a curiosity, it's a novelty. There's not much in it at all that shows you how to play properly. Some of the advice that's in it is absolutely absurd. The ladies, for example, were advised not to play in French high heels, or not to play in dresses that had got bustles or trains on the back. All players are advised that to play with a vellum racket, such as the one I've just shown you, you mustn't play in damp weather because your bat will go soggy. So there's all this sort of silliness involved in it as well. But all of the books in this period are very, very rare nowadays. And when they do crop up, you can expect to pay somewhere between £50 and £100 for them. But the good news is it is possible to buy reproduction books if you so wish, and you can buy them on demand for less than 20 quid. So if you were to look on, again, on the same 2 sites that I mentioned, AB Books, or on the internet system generally, you can find them usually for between £50 and £100. Incidentally, if you do see the very, very rare Ping Pong for Cats, it's a book produced by Clifton Bingham and Louis Wain in 1902. The price is almost certainly over £500, and that for a book which is only 10 pages long. The reason is that magic name, Louis Wain. I don't know whether anyone's heard of it before, but he was a famous postcard artist of 1900, and postcards were the thing at that time. You still see them now. They have postcard fairs, and they're nearly all postcards of about that sort of era, and they're highly collectible. All of Louis Wain's postcards were books of cats and kittens. And Wain portrayed them with human faces, great big eyes, And he had his cats doing everything from playing sports to holding meetings, playing cards, or drinking in a pub. Wain became so obsessed with his cats, and the stress and the strain eventually told on him, and he was admitted to a mental hospital near St Albans. He died in 1939, and at that stage, he was drinking out of a saucer, and the saucer was on the floor. That's how much it affected him. Blame that on table tennis. If you do happen to buy any Wain stuff at all, beware. There's a lot of fakes about. Now, highly desirable, and people will try and fool you into saying, oh, this is a Louis Wain postcard. Check it, make sure it is original.
Right, okay.
There is one.
Barry, can I bring in Mark to ask a question before you go on to number 5?
Okay, yeah, sure.
So, Barry, we actually have a question that's actually come up twice. So Paul Walker and Charlie Ellis are both asking about fiction books. One in particular is The Mighty Walzer by Howard Jacobson. Have you read it, Barry?
I'll tell you later.
Oh, okay. Question. So actually, that goes into the second part of the question. What about other fiction books out there for table tennis? Have you come across any?
There are. I don't think there are. There's one or two baby books, you know, for very young children. There's one or two with about 10 pages and a few pictures in and that sort of thing, but nothing of a serious nature. The mighty, can I correct you on one thing, Mark? The book is Walzer.
The Walzer, there we go.
Walzer is Strictly Come Dancing. There's no T in this one. It's Walzer. It's a great book. We'll talk about it later on, shall we?
Perfect. I'm really teeing things up for later on, so getting real insight.
Kieran, do you want to fire another question before Barry goes on to number 5?
So do you have any other collections, like not just table tennis, any other different sports or different type of things you collect?
Any other different sports? No. I've had the opportunity in going around a lot of second-hand bookshops. I sometimes see lawn tennis books about. I started to collect them at first, and when I got about 10, I thought, no, this is being silly. It's costing me far too much money collecting the table tennis ones. So no, I draw the line at that. Other collections, I suppose I have been a bit of a hoarder all my life. I always used to like to collect train numbers when I was a kid and that sort of thing. So yeah, the only other ones I do like reading books are books on discoveries and mountaineering and that sort of thing. You know,
okay, right, Barry, let's get you on to number 5.
Right, number 5. This will be a surprise one. I don't think I've seen anyone mention this one as being this is called Sizzling Chops. And
can you just hold it up and keep it still for a sec? Can everybody see that? Yep. Got it. Okay then, Barry. Yeah.
That came out in 2001, and there was a paperback edition, that one, which came out shortly after it in 2002. Now, I have to say, you've never heard of Joanne Charing, had you? I hadn't heard of him either. But I do like yarns and stories about table tennis. And some of the hair-raising tales in this book may be playing with fantasy, and I suspect that one or two are pure fabrication. But they're enjoyable fabrications, and I love them. The book captures your imagination, and it teases you with meetings with ping pong addicts like Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, and a few other rather famous ping pong people. And it's all good tales, well told. You probably have noticed from the title, there's a subtitle on this book. The subtitle is Ping Pong and the Art of Staying Alive. I wondered about that when I read it. And I found out. Stories told of Alex Ehrlich. Alex Ehrlich was 6'4" tall, thin, and he was a Polish Jew. Ehrlich had become famous in 1936 at the World Table Tennis Championships in Prague, when he chiselled his way into notoriety with the famous 2 hours, 12 minutes, 1 point. And he played against Romania's Paneth Farkas. The story is that after 70 minutes, Ehrlich's arm started to ache. And so he changed hands from his right hand to his left hand, and he carried on playing using his left hand. After 85 minutes, the umpire developed a stiff neck, and a new umpire was called, and he was substituted, and the point went on and on and on. It was getting late. The stadium started to empty. Ehrlich became bored, and he had a chessboard put to the sideline, and he whispered his chess moves to the Polish team captain who was sitting there, and the bloke moved the pieces around the board for him. After the ball had crossed the net over 12,000 times, Farkas's arm tired completely, and he lost the point. One love, said the umpire, after 2 hours, 12 minutes. One love. They started the second points. The second point, after 20 minutes, no one had scored. And one of the Polish team got a big loaf and a 2-foot Polish sausage out of his bag, and he started to set up a picnic for the rest of the team. Farkas was infuriated at this, and he started to attack. Ehrlich, completely passively, just got the ball back a couple of times. And Farkas screamed, threw his bat, the ball, into the crowd and ran screaming from the court. Now, that's the basic story that he talks about in this book. It isn't all of it, but that's just one of the stories in there. Here's the clever bit, the bit that most people don't know. Ehrlich, this was in 1936 when that championship was on. 3 or 4 years later, Ehrlich was sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. He was there, he was on his way to the gas chamber. He was being escorted to the gas chamber when a Nazi guard saw him and says, "Hey, 2 hours, 12 minutes, table tennis, you're the champion." Ehrlich was moved away from the gas chamber queue. They gave him another job then. You know what it was? I'd talk about out of the frying pan into the fire. They gave him a job as a diffuser of the bombs that were littered on the outside of the camp. So he became the diffuser of the bombs. Do you want to know why it's called Ping Pong and the Art of Staying Alive? That sort of points you in the right direction. There's another little story which this one's a bit shorter. So it tells you the tale of a bloke called Michael Glickman, who was born in Lithuania. He moved to Paris to avoid a possible Russian invasion. This was in the early 30s. When he got to Paris, he entered the French National Championships and he won it. 1931, he's French national champion. The French then refused to let him play in any more national championships because he was Jewish. So he was rather depressed and despondent about this. So he left and he went to New York. In New York, he became an international star, going around giving exhibitions on the stage with Ruth Aarons, who you might have heard of. She was their #1 woman and she was a bit of a glamour girl. And at the various exhibitions and that sort of thing, they used to bring on the table tennis table, and Aarons and Glickman used to give demonstrations and that sort of thing. After a couple of years, Glickman became homesick and he went back to France. When the Nazis then came and occupied Paris, Glickman hid. He used a false identity paper to escape to Lyon, where they thought he might not be quite so well known. he then had to stay in this apartment in Lyon for 3.5 years until the war ended and liberation came along. He never played again. He escaped death narrowly on several occasions whilst he was in Lyon. Now, when you hear tales like that, you can quite understand the art of staying alive. It's amazing, isn't it, these stories you get about table tennis. Not all the book is gloomy and serious stuff like that. There's a lot about the hustling and the betting on various sessions, which is highly amusing, but it's tales about the game that you learn about the game, the history of the game, that sort of thing. And I find that sort of thing absolutely amazing and fascinating.
Okay, we'll get a question. I think we've got another one on YouTube, haven't we, Mark or Karen, if one of you want to read it out?
Yeah, Dave, I mean, to be fair, if that was only number 5, I'm absolutely hooked to find out the rest of Barry's list. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, the question actually, it's more a recommendation actually that's come in, I think, from Graham Stevenson, Killygrad, who obviously took about an interest in social media before this. He's talking about in 2020, he's seen a lot of books published, but on your website, Barry, it doesn't make any mention to It Takes Balls to Play Table Tennis by Des Flanagan, a story of an Irish veteran returning. Are you aware of that one, Barry?
I've heard of it, but I haven't been able to get hold of one yet. I think it's the only one that I haven't. Every other one that's come out in 2020, I think I've got. The reason for there being a glut, of course, is that now you can publish your own using the Amazon facilities. You don't have to go through agents and all the rest of it. You just publish your own. I know someone who produced one at the golf club where I play golf, and he produced his own. And I read it, and it was dreadful, absolutely awful. I said to him, "You're not going to expect people to buy that, are you?" And he said, "Well, I just fancy being an author." But it was awful.
Right, let's go to number 4, Barry.
Okay, right. This one is a bit more like you might have been expecting me to sing the praises of. There we go. It's the book by Timo Boll, Table Tennis by Timo Boll, and a guy called Bernd Ulrich Gross. And Gross is a famous German coach as well. I've got a lot of time for Boll. He was world number 1 as long ago as 2003. In 2018, he was world number 1 again, for the 3rd time, in fact. But he was 37 years old, and he was world number 1.
Harry, that's the same age as you won the Warwickshire Championship.
Yes, you're right. And I know from personal experience, it's blooming hard work, and that's at county level. This guy's number 1 in the world. And I find it interesting because he achieves his success with a smaller ball, first of all. Yeah. And then, what are we talking about? 15 years later, he then transformed himself into playing with a plastic ball, with a bigger ball, and he still ended up being world number 1. I think that's a staggering achievement. I really do. The changes in techniques at the highest level are subtle, but they're very, very hard to adapt to. And to do it at the world level, I think it's fantastic. I think I might have mentioned to you, I've always advocated that the best teaching books are always the most recently published. As long as it's by a respected player or coach. And some of the very good books of yesteryear just don't apply nowadays. I think that the Boll book is the one to get at the moment. But just will you wait until Marlin brings out a book, because I'm going to buy it, or Marlon for that matter. I just think that the latest books are nearly always good. They give the latest techniques and everything. And if you get one of the older books, yeah, you'll pick up a few tips from it and that sort of thing, but not much. Whereas on this book, I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. It's about 280 pages, colour photographs throughout, sequences, everything. It's just a great book. I enjoyed some of the little touches, like when to take a time out. And who decides it? Is it you, or is it your coach who's sitting on the sideline? Who's going to decide? Because that could lead to a lot of arguments, couldn't it? If you're really getting to go and your coach calls a timeout, I think you'd be furious. I think that's the sort of thing that you need to discuss before you even go on the table or in the tournament. It's one of the things you need to get sorted out with your coach straight away. You know, who's going to call the timeouts? Because I think there are occasions where you lose your temper when you're on the table, and you know, a good coach then I think would say timeout, you know, just so that he can calm you down a bit and get you focused again. But it's interesting having that sort of discussion in the books. I've heard that mentioned many times in books on table tennis. And he's got another interesting little discussion that table tennis doesn't have style scores. All that matters is playing the ball over the net in a way that keeps the opponent from reaching it or forces him into making the error. It is exclusively about scoring points. Now, my point would be, yes, I agree with that. But on the other hand, isn't the fact that you have style a way of getting you to repeat the shot time after time after time without making too many mistakes? So, I think, I agree with it almost. But I can see the point where you need to practice things, and the way to practice them is by repeating them, and that becomes a style, doesn't it? It's funny that, I mean, he's world number one. Who am I to tell him that he's wrong? But Chester Barnes made a similar point in his book when he says, get to it somehow and hammer it somewhere. And, it's a similar sort of argument, really, isn't it? And you can see that there are circumstances when that's what you have to do. So there we have it. That's very, very good. Incidentally, I think that Boll's fantastic. And I think that he and Waldner are the two best European players of the last 60 years. In my opinion, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I think they're both better than, say, Samsonov or one or two of the others who might be considered. But I think they're great players. And I think it's a very, very good book.
Okay, number three then, Barry.
Okay, we're getting towards the drum roll. Number three. The one I've selected is this one. It's called Pong Fever. And it's by a guy called Steve Grant. It was published in 2012. And Steve Grant is a brilliant researcher. Most of the stuff that's in here is dated in 1902. You can see there's about 260 pages in there. And it's all about 1902 because Steve has scoured the newspapers in New York and in the UK, finding out all little tidbits about what's happened. And the Omaha News says this, and the Pennsylvania Journal says that, and so on and so forth. And there's fantastic anecdotes, stories, yarns, clippings, postcards. And he's an ace table tennis historian. It's a darn good read, and it gives you some idea of the way that Pong Fever absolutely gripped the world in 1902. And the excitement generated by this new game is absolutely captured superbly. Steve's a New Yorker, and he plays regularly at the Lower Manhattan Spin Club. He also plays at the Pong Club on West Side. Now, I visited the Spin Club about 4 or 5 years ago, but Steve wasn't there, and neither was the part owner, who's the film star, Susan Sarandon. They weren't there, but the place was absolutely packed. Even on a midweek afternoon, I've got about 20 tables, 3 or 4 full-time coaches. They've got 2 resident guys, 2 employees going around with a stick with the net on the end of it, just picking up the balls. Full time they're doing this. They don't stop for anything. They're just going around picking up the balls. Each table has a hopper by the side of it with about 1,000 balls in it. And so you don't go and fetch your ball when it goes off. You leave it for the collector to go and collect the balls, and you just get another one out the hopper and off you go again. So it's almost like continuous multi-ball. It really is a super place. Steve contributes a lot of table tennis research for the Table Tennis Collector magazine, and it's always an informative read. It really is a good book, once you start on it. I don't think he goes more than a couple of paragraphs on any one subject before he's on to something else, the different ways that the game is affecting different parts of society. It's a great book. And believe it or not, it's still available at Amazon now for under a tenner. I think it's $9.99 or something like that. And I think When I looked at it, which was only last week, I think it was $9.99, and that includes postage. So that's a darn good book. Do you know what the Table Tennis Collector magazine is?
Go on then.
No, anyone know? Okay, I'll tell you briefly. It was started in 1993, and it was then about 20 pages long. It's issued 4 times a year, and it used to be produced from the ITTF offices in Lucerne. It's now still produced by the curator of the ITTF offices at his home, which is now just outside Washington in the States. And the first one came out, it was about 20 pages long. They're now up to about 80 or 90 pages each issue. And it tells you the history of the game. It was there when Steve Grant, who discovered that bit I was telling you about earlier about the Patents Office, Steve Grant discovered it, and it was published in the Table Tennis Collector magazine, which is where everyone found out about it. It's a great magazine. If you put Table Tennis Museum and then Table Tennis Collector magazine into Google, it'll take you to the site and you'll see all the magazines listed, and you can go to any one of the 93 issues and you can get a printout or just read them straight off there. It gives you the full issue and everything in there, and it's a really good read. There's a lot of dross in there as well. Now, sometimes you might not be interested in a continuous lot of patents and all the rest of it, where they patent the ball collectors and all sorts of things. But it's quite interesting in that you've got the latest postage stamps that have been published around the world, and all sorts of things have been discovered. It'll also tell you the auction prices where people have bought table tennis bats and all the rest of it, how much they paid for them. And it's quite surprising, you know, you find some people have paid £200 or £300 for a bat, and relatively recent bats as well. Things like Johansson bats have been coming up for sale, and people have been paying a couple of £100 for them. So get it, it's a good read. It's well worth it. For £9.99, you can't go wrong on that.
Okay, we're down to number 2.
Right. This one, I suspect, it's the one that on the various lists by, what was that fella's name that you were telling me about, the one who was the editor?
Charlie Ellis.
Charlie Ellis, that's him. I bet he hasn't got this one. It's called Table Tennis Fascination. And it's a book that was published by the ITTF. And all told now, I think they've done a series of 15 of them.
Wow.
I've got 10 of them. And the reason being that the latest ITTF offices is now moved to Shanghai. I've written to them about 5 times or emailed them, and I can't get any response. So I haven't been able to get the most recent ones. These books are absolutely fantastic. I'll show you in a minute some of the pages inside. It's a Chinese book with a smattering of English. There's hardly any text at all. It's printed in Japan and published under the auspices of the ITTF. You'll notice that the on that earlier book that we looked at by Pong Fever, it's got profusely illustrated on every one. This one ought to be wonderfully profusely illustrated. It's fabulous. It captures the amazing photographic skills and all that's wonderful about modern game. It captures the excitement of a modern international tour, the determination, the explosive shots, and the knowledge and the enthusiasm of the spectators. Absolutely unmatched photographic techniques. And every time I get any one of the books, this is number 6, every time I get any one of the 10 books that I've got out, I just look at it and I go, wow, what photographs. Absolutely fabulous. I've just opened it at random. That's the sort of thing that you get there. Can you see that? Yeah?
Yeah.
And there's page after page after page of them. They're just fantastic books. And the shots on there, Samsonov on the left, and on the right it's Wang Hao, I think was world champion of last but one, was it? Or maybe the one before that. Fabulous photographs in there. And it just captures
Barry, is it the same photographer or is it a range of photographers?
No, they're nearly always Japanese photographers.
Yeah, no,
But,
is it the
no,
same photographer or variety of photographers?
Variety of them. They're really sensational. And every one that you can pick up, any one of the 10 that I've got, you just pick it up and you think, God, that's good. Oh, that's great. And it's just fabulous books. Nothing to read about. You don't learn anything as such, but it just thrills me, to be honest. When I look at it, I think, God, I wish I could play like that. That's number 2. So
what is coming in at number 1?
Just giving you a drum roll. Number 1.
Top of the pops.
This is a fabulous book. I think it takes a lot of reading, and in particular, I enjoyed the tales. This is The Money Player. I enjoyed the tales about Reisman's battles with Barner, Bergman, Vanya, and his fellow countryman, Dick Miles. And it's the only book that I've read that really talks in detail of the opponent's styles and mannerisms, and in some cases their weaknesses, and he knows where to go for. And he talks at length about his battles with the Japanese spin king, sponge king, Saito. And, you know, again, I hadn't realised that Victor Barner, I never saw Barner play, but I hadn't realised that he was so backhand dominant. And Reisman says that you had to watch him because sometimes he didn't use a forehand for a whole game, or backhand. You know, so he was attacking somebody like Bergman or somebody like that, and he just backhanded him off. You know, didn't use his forehand at all for a whole game. So it just little things like that I enjoy reading about and thinking, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I enjoyed the tales of his tours. He went on tour, Reisman, with a guy called Doug Cartland, and Cartland was in the top 5 or 6 in the world. You know, he's a very, very good player. And they used to do tours with the Harlem Globetrotters, who were supposedly the world's best basketball team. And they used to do an act in the middle while there was halftime or whatever it is that they have in basketball. And you learn things while you're looking at some of these books. I hadn't realised, in fact, I was amazed at the fact that even in the 1950s, the Harlem Globetrotters had to go and sit at the back of the team bus because of the racial segregation. They weren't allowed to sit at the front of the bus. Cartland and Reisman were allowed to sit at the front of the bus. They couldn't, had to go to the back because they were black. And that was 1950s. So yeah, I found that surprising. So I can do no better than quote you from the dust covers. This is an exciting, marvelously enjoyable book by and about one of America's greatest athletes and most outrageous rebels who plays a game that is as misunderstood as it is popular, and who in the process lives a life that is unique, dedicated, fun, and a joy to read about. That was Marty Reisman. He died in 2012. And we'll miss him. He was known as the table tennis hustler because when he started, he played at a place, I think it was called Lawrence's in New York, where he used to play. And practically every game they used to play for money. And they used to hustle. You know, they get a stranger in there, think, oh, we can take him for $30 or something. And offer him 10 start, knowing full well that they were probably the best 1 or 2 players in the whole of the USA. And they give somebody 10 start and then whop them. The poor bloke could only get about 3 points or something. And they used to make a living out of doing things like that. There's lots of little stories about that in that book. It's a great book. Really is very good. So that's my top 6. So who do you think should have gone in there that I haven't said?
Kieran, Kieran or Mark, have you got a missing book that it's not been mentioned?
I'm going to go for the obvious one, and it's one of my questions. Where's David Fairholm's book? Barry, in case you didn't know, I spent weeks doing this with Dave, and every week this book used to pop up. So the fact that David Fairholm's book from, was it 1985, Dave?
It was indeed, yeah.
I think even I remember the year is not in there. It's astonished me.
Mark, if I don't put mine in, there's no way I'm putting David's in. Yeah, it's they're good books, but I think even David will acknowledge now they're out of date. It's simple as that. The game has changed a lot. The rubbers have changed. Even the scoring's changed now. That's got to affect your tactics and that sort of thing, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think
mean, one of the things we said, Barry, on a previous Zoomcast is take Ewan Walker of Scotland. He's actually won, just like you were saying about Boll, he's actually the only player in Scotland who's won the national championships up to 21, up to 11, with a 40mm ball and a 38mm ball.
Sorry, who's that?
Ewan Walker.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, he was 12 times champion, and then Gavin's just overtaken him.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
When I first started to play, the Scottish #1 is his name Sinclair? Malcolm Sinclair?
Malcolm Sinclair.
Malcolm Sinclair, yeah?
It rings a bell. I might be wrong, though. I'm sure if
Malcolm
you use YouTube...
Malcolm Sugden.
Malcolm Sugden, that's it, you've got it.
Yeah.
And he was, he played for Scotland, but I think he also played for Middlesex as well, because he lived in
He did
London
indeed, yeah.
And he was a hell of a player. I saw him play a lot.
Yeah. Now, funny if you talk about the hustler, but this wasn't a hustle. I think Malcolm won the first big tournament where there was £100 prize. And it was a televised event in those days as well. Anyway, we're going off the subject. It's books we're on about. Kieran, have you got another one for Barry?
I've had one from Graham Stevenson, who said, have you read 21 Up by Richard Bergman?
Would you like to ask me in about 20 minutes' time?
Right. Okay, well, let's go to now. Are you going to go to 12 to 7 or 7 to 12?
I'm going to go to number 7 now.
Yeah, you've got 10 minutes to get all 5 in, but we can overrun a little bit. So off you go, number 7.
Number 7, 21 Up by Richard Bergman.
How about that, Kieran?
It's like Kieran, you.
Or Graham. Yeah.
Some people think that the Bergman book is the best in the world. It's the best ever table tennis book, they say, and they'll be disappointed to see it at number 7 in my selection. I can understand that, but I think the difference between that and the Bergman book is fairly marginal, as it is between all of these, but there's a big difference, and the big difference is the 24 years between the Bergman book of 1950 and the Reisman book of 74, because what happened in the meantime then? Sponge came along, changed the game completely. So a lot of the Bergman's book's 250 pages or something like that, and about 100 of those on how to play the game. And frankly, there are very little interest now. Some of the tactical thing is quite good in it, but I think the more modern English as well makes it slightly easier to read, but it's the Sponge really that makes a big difference. There can be no doubt whatsoever that Bergman was the better player. Bergman was 4 times world champion, twice before the war, and then he came back and he won it twice again after the war. So it's a fabulous achievement, and he was a great player, and I understand from people who've spoken to him that he was an extremely nice fellow as well. But this is a fascinating book, but to me, it sort of lacks the adventure and the raciness that the Reisman story has. But it's still a very good book. It's interesting, it's before Sponge, it's before Speed Glue and all that sort of thing, but the only section that I enjoyed at the end on how to play is he gives a list of do's and don'ts. And sometimes when you're looking through these older books, you tend to be a bit find fault with them really, when probably none exists. But at one stage he says in these do's and don'ts, you ought to be a very good loser, and remember that there's always a next time. Now, I certainly wouldn't coach that to anyone myself. I can imagine a lot of top players whose answer to being told there's always a next time, the reply would have been a very short expletive I don't think many people enjoy having just come off the table and lost. I don't think too many people enjoy being told there's always a next time. But there you go, little things like that. Unlike the US players, who according to Reisman were sort of a really laid back bunch of gamblers, hustlers and entertainers, many of the European stars seem to be poverty stricken, and perhaps the constraints of living through World War II held many players back from achieving their best, such as Bergman, such as Vanya, who did quite well before the war and afterwards, but of course it knocked 6 or 7 years out of their playing career, right at the height of their powers. But it was in this book that I learned that dear old Maurice Goldstein, who was the former Birmingham table tennis secretary and became the English president, he served, according to Bergman, in the Royal Tank Corps. I didn't know that, so I knew Maurice pretty well. So I made a point of going across to his house and asking him about 30 years ago, what happened in the Royal Tank Corps? And he gave me a most charming smile. And he said, well, it's better inside a tank than marching along outside one when everybody's firing bullets. So there you have it. It's a truly superb book. Its popularity means that you probably would have to pay 20 to 30 pounds for a decent copy. When Bergman was touring, he used to carry his books in a big bag, and he used to sign them and dish them out after his exhibition. One of my copies is signed, "Good luck, Richard Bergman, 28-3-50, Grimsby." And I'm never quite sure whether he meant good luck at table tennis or the best of good luck living in Grimsby. I shouldn't say that. So if you come from Grimsby, I apologise. That's number 7.
Number 8.
Number 8. Number 8. Sorry, I didn't show you. That's the Bergman book. I missed that. There it is, the Bergman book. Came out in 2 editions. One was published in the March of 1950, and they had to have a reprint only 3 months afterwards because that was selling so well. That's that. So we're moving on. And the next one that I've got is a book that you may have seen in the shops. If you haven't, you ought to go and get it because it's relatively cheap. And everything you know is Pong. Don't know whether you've seen that one about. It's superbly presented. Lots of pictures, anecdotes, stories, and all sorts of things in it. It's a really good book. Well worth the money going out and getting that one. Got original photographs, cuttings, anecdotes, and you will find surprise things in there. Articles and photos you've never seen before. Read how Fidel Castro played his part in the history of our game. You can read about the incredible story of Angelica Rosano, who won 6 consecutive world singles titles and was then banned by her own country, Romania. She was banned from playing because she was Jewish. I like some of the witticisms and the advice in there, such as pity the ping pong player who knows it all. If he knows everything like that, he has to be very fearful of the odd surprise. And I think that's very true. I mean, we've all played against some of these pompous players who think they know it all, very, very confident, but you whistle a couple around their ears and they soon lose that, soon get knocked off their perch and disintegrate. But there you go. There are also photos in there of naked men playing table tennis, and not to be outdone, there's photos of naked ladies also undressing. Now, I always found it infuriating if I ever lost to a woman, and I did on a couple of occasions that I can think of. But to lose to a lady who is completely naked, I think I would find that understandable. But there you go. I wouldn't like to lose to one who was fully dressed. So in preparing for this meeting, I've flicked through the various pages of that book yet again. And every time I flick through it, I find something different because there's lots of articles in it. It's good stuff, really good. And it's an exciting book, not to be missed. That's number 8. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
This is one of your favourites, Dave. Your favourite, More Than a Match by Chester Barnes.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I did.
I've included this book because I like Chester Barnes. I think he did a lot for the game. I watched him play on several occasions, when I watched him whack Alan Rhodes for his first English closed win at somewhere near the Elephant and Castle in 1962, he became my hero. Barnes then was 15 years old and I was 17 years old. I'd only just started to play, and there was this young Jack the Lad Cockney kid. He was already whacking everybody else in sight. He was a superb player. He was 15. And the names that Barnes recalls in his biography became familiar names to me as I was getting a little bit better, and I felt privileged to have played against several of them. I even played Barnes himself at the Sussex Open, where he gave me a right whacking. And again, I played him in the National League in about 1980, when he made a surprise comeback for Milton Keynes in the National League. And I managed a sneaky win then, but it was way past his best, and he didn't like any form of funny bats or long pimples or anything like that, and he was completely at sea with it. So generally, I think Barnes is not given enough credit for his amazing performances. To win the English Clouds at 15 years old, it's never been done since. You know, it's an amazing performance. And it was probably so
Barry,
good,
if I
so
can
young,
win it,
that
because it's in that book. In Scotland, we had a magazine called The Bulletin, and it ran for a number of years. You know, there's 200 or 300 copies of it, or different issues. And the editor was Mike McLaren. And Mike was also a member of the Murrayfield Table Tennis Club as well. He sadly died about 15 years ago. But Chester mentions Mike McLaren in that book. He said he was a very talented player, but he didn't have the eye of a tiger. He didn't have that killer instinct. He was too nice.
He was a magnificent player at his best. He was really good. I don't think he's given enough credit. I don't really. He had. I'll start again. He had nowhere near the success that Desmond Douglas had.
No.
Desmond was a much better player. But Des didn't win his first senior title until he was 19. You know, it's an amazing achievement to win.
Nicky Jarvis in the final.
And he was a real character. You know,
right, can we get 10, 11 and 12?
He was a real character. Okay, right. I'm going to move on. Number 10, the mighty Walzer. This one's for you, Mark.
Well done, Barry. You said it correctly. Top marks.
There it is. No T, look, Walzer. That's the original one. It's come out again in a different edition and an American edition. And it's also come out as a stage play now. Now, I haven't seen the stage play advertised anyway. When it does, I'll try and see it, but that's it there. And it's a novel by the greatest selling author of the generation, or one of the greatest selling authors of the generation. And it was a bestseller both sides of the Atlantic, devoted to table tennis. It's a story of growing up of a guy called Oliver Walzer, both as a table tennis player at the Akiva Club and as a young boy, and his introduction to the fairer sex. I don't want to tell you too much about it because it might spoil it, but it is a very, very funny, it's a great book. Jacobson played to a reasonable standard himself in the Manchester League, and I think he even represented Lancashire on a few occasions. And so he knows and he understands the practice ethics, the changing room banter at the club and that sort of thing. But he is, above everything else, he's a storyteller of immense talent, and the captivating stories are often hilarious. It was voted in the Sunday Telegraph as one of the greatest sporting novels ever.
Oh, brilliant.
And I venture to suggest something. If it was a bestseller, both this side of the Atlantic and also the other side of the Atlantic, I reckon there's a very good chance that that could be the best-selling table tennis book ever.
What, even more than David Fairholm?
I would hazard a guess that it probably sold 500,000 each side of the Atlantic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right, so
That'd be my
number
guess.
11.
That's it. That's 10. Number 11. Yeah. Here we go. Oggy.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
Somebody
this has
else.
nothing to
That's
do with
Barry, just to
Oggy,
stop you,
Oggy,
that's
Oggy.
actually one of our questions that have come in from fellow selector Sinclair Houston that was asking about that book. So great that you're covering that off for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got it in as number 11. What was he asking about it, Mark?
He was just basically
Just saying it's a
asking,
good book, was it?
his viewpoint was the first half of it was great, describing his journey to world champion, but he wanted to get your viewpoint on it.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I agree. I mean, he was world singles champion in 54 and 56, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good book. But it is a good book. It's quite enthralling. And of course, whereas the others grown up in sort of situations and that we're fairly familiar with, this was a small boy growing up in a very poor district. His father died when he was 2.5. So he was brought up by his mother, who hadn't got any money. He then went to the local table tennis club, and the lady who ran the club, who was also the caretaker and the cleaner and everything else, she took pity on him, and she used to give him a meal every time he went there. And later on, she even went as far as washing his clothes for him and darning his socks and all that sort of thing. But he still grew up as a sort of unsociable, reclusive, and it was a real struggle for him growing up. But he learned to play at school. He joined this local club. And the story of his quest for supremacy went on, and his improvement, a lot of it came from within. He used to write down after every game how he'd played, what the result was, and how he thinks he ought to have done better next time round. And because of that, they started to say, they called him the thinker or the visionary. And for a rather spindly looking man, he was remarkably powerful, and he attacked relentlessly with a crushing forehand. And for most of his career, he played with inverted rubber, that's pimples inwards, and a sponge that was nearly a centimetre thick. I hadn't realised that until, I'm ready to game last week, actually, just to make sure I knew everything that was in it. I didn't realise they were playing with sponge that thick in, say, 1956.
Yeah.
They were. So he acquitted himself as a superstar in the game, and he turned his attention to the administration of the game. And he became ITTF vice president in 1979. And then in 87, he became president. And it was a position in which he excelled. I mean, the orange balls that you see about now and the blue tables, that was Ogimura's idea, doing that. The ITTF Museum in Narahara, the computer processing of world rankings, that was Ogimura. Next to the entry to the Olympic Games, that was negotiated by Ogimura. It was so energetic and almost indestructible, and it was a great surprise to everyone because he'd become a slave to the sport that he loved so passionately. And it's a great surprise. At the age of 62, he was struck down. I don't say what it is. It's by a malignant disease. Right. And he died in 1994. But he was a magnificent player, an extraordinary administrator. And, the one thing that dawns on me when I read about people like Ogimura, the more I read about these wonderful players, the more I am conscious of the fact there's very little talent involved. More than anything else, it's long, punishing, sheer hard work to get right to the top. And the ones that get to the top, they don't have to work hard. They deserve it.
Yeah.
So
number 12, Barry.
Number 12. Now, this is my most contentious one. I'm going to tell you two things. I had a big decision to make. I didn't know whether to pick this one, which is The Will to Win by Dragutin Surbek, which I rate as a good book. But I felt that somehow it lacked a bit of warmth to it. He talks about, I played him, and then I played him, and then I went and played him, and did that. There wasn't too much of a story of him as a man quite so much, but he was my favourite player to actually watch, as an international. I thought he was magnificent. By the way, he was 74 last week. I can't believe he's
All
74, but there you go. So the book that I did pick, this is the contentious one, is this one. It's called Table Tennis from Then Till Now. And it's only came out about 3 months ago. And it's written by a bloke, you might know him.
Yeah, Roden Fullen, yeah.
You know him, do you?
Yes, I do, yeah.
I've never met the guy. And I picked this, I saw it advertised, so I thought, oh, I'll buy that one for my collection. And have you had a chance to read it? No?
No, I haven't, no.
Okay. It's not easy reading. It's extremely complicated, and you have to read 2 or 3 pages and then go and have a cup of tea before you read any more. And some of the scientific concepts are not all that well explained, if I'm honest, and it's certainly not suitable for beginners. I think the opening article could well put them off for life. There's no logical sequence for learning the game, and in places the same topics and ideas are repeated, making the whole thing rather frustrating. Now, you might think, well, why the hell have you put it in your top 12? And the reason is this: it studies at length the different techniques for dealing with a plastic ball and for dealing with the 40mm ball, which I don't think anything else does really to that degree. It deals with the women's game. And it suggests that the main reason that European women haven't even reached a women's final for 47 years and not won a world championship medal for 65 years. 65 years since a European lady won the world title. Amazing.
Yeah. Barry, that's not quite true because in singles.
In singles, yeah. Yeah, it is true in singles.
Because Secretan and Bernadette won the mixed doubles in 77.
They did. Bergeret, wouldn't it?
Bergeret, yeah.
Yeah. But this is singles that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And he makes the point that our women are taught to play the same way as the men, in that they are taught to try and spin the ball as much as you possibly can, and power play and as much spin as you can. Whereas he reckons that the Asian women are taught quickness, close to the table rallies, the more emphasis on attacking serves earlier, with slightly slower bats or even not long pimples, even short pimples, so that you can get in quicker to allow them to do that. They're taught to play chest on rather than losing milliseconds turning to get their side in so they can play a full shot and to extract the maximum amount of spin. And I've seen the last 2 English closed finals, and I've watched Tin Tin Ho absolutely demolish the opposition because she gets in quicker than anyone else and she dominates them. As soon as they look to it, she loves it. She just blocks it straight back past them. She doesn't go back from the table and try and spin. If you watched Kelly Sibley doing things like that, if Kelly is attacked, she goes back and tries to spin it. Yeah. Whereas this girl just stands there and nothing's going to get past her. She just stands there and wallops it back again. Now, I understand that Kelly Sibley's recently been appointed team coach for the Commonwealth Games that's coming up this year. It'd be interesting to hear her views on this. I have to say that she's been an immense success at a very high level. I mean, she's been national champion, I think it's 3 times now. But just perhaps if, say, 5 years ago, she'd have been changed to taking the ball earlier and staying up to the table rather than stepping back and trying to play like Liam. Now, she tries to play like Liam Pitchford, and I think it's a mistake. I think she should be standing up to the table and doing that. Now, this is me speaking now. This isn't Mr. Fullen. Albert Einstein once said, insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again and expect to have different results. And I think that's what the ladies are doing. They should have been saying long ago, this isn't working, let's change it. but they keep on doing it. And in defence of, is it Ron Fullen? I don't know the guy. I think it's Ron Fullen.
Roden Fullen.
Roden, is it? Oh, right. And in his defence, he does say that this book is not so much a teaching book, but it's a collection of articles, lectures, seminars that he's collected over decades. And I can't help but agree. I can't help but agree with a lot of his notions, but I do wish that the book had been better organised into a logical progression, because I think it would have made the book so much more attractive and easier to read. I mean, some of his scientific stuff in there, you really have to study very hard to try and follow what he's talking about.
Sounds like Roden, yeah.
It's very, very, very contentious, but it does stop and make you think, and that's what I liked about it, to be honest.
Yeah. Just going to stop there. Are there any bits we haven't picked up from the chat lines? And are there any burning last questions?
Yeah, so just a couple of points, Dave. I think, I mean, there's a lot of questions, as mentioned at the start, that came in from Charlie Ellis. I hope that, Charlie, if you're watching, that Barry's covered off a lot of your points tonight about diplomacy, about table tennis books, about looking back at history, how the war affected it, the Harlem Globetrotter situation. So obviously, I hope that's covered it off for you, Charlie. Are you going to say something, Barry? Sorry.
Thing, Mark. Yeah, that's the book that Charlie was on about, Ping Pong Diplomacy. I don't think he's aware of that one, which is called Ping Pong Diplomats, and that's published in the States. And that's a very good book as well. So if you like that one, I'm pretty sure he'd like this one.
Yeah, brilliant. So a lot of points covered off. I think me and Graham Stevenson were thinking from the same point. I'm sure, and Graham, I hope he didn't look at my notes beforehand. He got a copy of them. But we're both wondering about a book that hasn't been written yet from a player. Is there a book that you were maybe looking forward to? I mean, a lot of good players. I mean, Graham mentions Richard Jewell, Des Douglas. But is there a book that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, as I say, I'd love for one of these top Chinese players to tell us the honest story of their training routines, the regime that they've gone through, what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do.
There isn't much out there, is there, Barry? Like, i.e., from Chinese table tennis players and the theory of it. It's all basically European or American type.
Yeah, I get the impression that some of their views might be stifled. I don't know. We don't know, do we, really? But I'd love to see, say, Marlin or one of these top guys, Marlong or someone, sort of tell us honestly, how much do you practice a day? When did you start? Who teaches you? You know, and you know, find out a bit more about it.
Karen, I'm going to let you ask the last question.
Yeah.
There's a question from Ben Hart.
Oh, good.
Do you think table tennis books now have more information and tactics than table tennis books back in the day?
I think they've changed. The tactics and everything else have changed significantly. I don't think there's any more now than there was then. I think perhaps in the days of the 30s and the 40s, the points were a lot longer, and you had to make up your mind about what you were going to do and do it over a longer period. Nowadays, because the game is so fast, you have to do everything on a sort of instant reaction basis. So, and the fact that it's gone down to 10 points, you just don't have time to think. I mean, when I was playing, I was a defensive player. What I used to do most of the time was I'd attack for the first 7 or 8 points, just to see if I could knock this bloke out the way fairly quickly, so I didn't have to run around too much, particularly if it's a tournament. You're going to tire yourself out. You can't do that nowadays. If I messed around for the first 8 points, you know, I'd probably be 5-3 down or something like that. And that's too much. I can't afford to do that now. You've got to start right from the word go. That thing's, you know, that's changed a lot. So I think the tactics have changed, and they've had to change because the game's changed. Does that answer the question?
Great. Okay. Well, we've don't worry. We always overrun on these nights because we're not dictated by adverts. We're not dictated by the next program.
And we've got nothing else to do, Dave.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating. And as Barry said to me in the week, he has never said that these are the best 12 books. This is purely his selection. You may have a different selection, Mark. Kieran may have a different selection. There might be some, because nobody can say what the best books are, but I've been fascinated to hear. And there's loads of books I wish I'd have asked you about. Anne Hayden's book, I enjoyed her, but loads and loads and loads. We probably could have gone on until midnight. So Barry, first of all, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to come on. It's been a completely different topic. We've been thoroughly absorbed by your knowledge, both obviously as a table tennis player, but the work that's gone into your library. And could I say to people of Table Tennis Scotland, if they've got any further questions, if they could email them to you, Barry, or would I?
Yes, of course. I'll give you my email address if I can. My email address is sunbar, that's SUNBAR 102 @gmail.com. And if they want to look at my address on the internet for the Table Tennis Library, it is in fact Table Tennis Library, all one word, .co.uk.
Okay, well, look, can I say thank you to Kieran, thank you to Mark, and a big thanks to our special guest, Barry Hayward.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it
Don't
immensely.
go yet, Barry.